Welcome to another Cheesy Chat video. Today we're going to be talking about something very serious and something that you've definitely heard about, and it's basically how to stop the coronavirus, COVID-19, SARS-2, whatever you'd like to refer to it as. And I wanted to take an alternate, more holistic approach compared to the powers that be currently, who are using lockdowns and using mass vaccination to control this pandemic. A lot of people like to call it the plandemic, the scamdemic, whatever your opinions are, whether you adhere to the mainstream narrative presented to us by the government and mainstream news, or if you'd like to adhere to independent journalism, independent scientists and doctors and virologists and epidemiologists, and the internet, YouTube, or a lot of other websites, a lot of independent journalist outlets. Whether you want to adhere to their ulterior narrative or the mainstream narrative, I don't really care. Okay, I'm just gonna discuss what I believe is right. So as I said, I wanted to take a holistic approach and an alternate approach. A mainstream approach is a very mainstream scientific approach. Obviously these lockdowns and the vaccines is everything the government is really all the government can come up with to combat this pandemic. The reason I do that when I say pandemic is the World Health Organization, the leading body on health science, the leading global body on health science, changed what they classify as a pandemic after the pandemic erupted back in like the start of last year. They literally changed the classification of what is deemed a pandemic, the cases and the deaths. Okay, the last pandemic I can actually think of was the polio pandemic in 1950. There might have been another one. Honestly, I don't really know. It's not really relevant to the video anyway. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that the majority of people who died from the coronavirus had at least 3 or more, most of them at least 4 comorbidities. Okay, what is a comorbidity? A comorbidity is a health condition that has the potential to take your life. Okay, so the main ones include cancer, heart disease, obesity, okay, lung disease and lung cancer, and there's a plethora of respiratory issues and blood issues and heart issues, and there's a lot of there's too many comorbidities out there to exist. Okay, so at least I believe the stat was at least 80%. However, I can definitely see it being more, but at least 80% of people who died from the coronavirus had at least 3 comorbidities. A lot of these people had 5 or 6 comorbidities. Now you might know someone with a comorbidity. Unfortunately, it's very common in today's society. Obesity is very common, heart disease is very common, cancer is very common, and this is very unfortunate. We're supposed to be living in the most advanced time, the most scientific advanced time, the age of information, the age of technology, the age of scientific discovery. Okay, however, it seems like the general population is, instead of evolving their health, they're de-evolving, and the health is on the decline. You look at someone 1,000 years ago, and I don't know where I read this, but apparently, back in the caveman times, back in the Paleolithic times, the average person was as fit, as strong, as fast as an Olympic athlete today. And obviously it makes a lot of sense. With our modern day conveniences, a lot of that has been taken out. Those people were running for miles, they were climbing up trees, they were fighting God knows what, they were active all day, they were eating hand to mouth, they were eating fibrous vegetables, straight from the root. They were eating fresh meat, that would, and not just fresh meat, but the entire animal, you know, all the way from the toes to the head, you know. So that explains why people were so much fitter and healthier back in the day, and also why, you know, we've been told we're in a pandemic, and we've got all this modern day technology to deal with this pandemic, all these pharmaceutical drugs, these pharmaceutical companies helping us deal with this pandemic. And that's all great, that's all fine, you know, but people back in the day, they didn't have doctors, they didn't have pharmacies, they didn't have the internet. So how did they survive? How did they survive their pandemics? How did they survive? How is humanity even still living, right? When those people back in the day, they didn't have anything that we had, but they survived. They must have, you know, faced similar threats that we did. They must have had their own disease outbreaks, their own pandemics, their own epidemics. Okay, an epidemic is different because, you know, we are facing a lot of epidemics these days. Obviously, the obesity epidemic worldwide, especially young people, we're facing a mental health epidemic, and also the worst thing that we're facing is potentially the suicide epidemic. You know, there's been a rise in young people's suicides, especially here in New Zealand, and especially during the lockdowns, those spike, you know, those that's a whole nother video talking about the lockdowns and talking about the benefits and the disadvantages of the lockdowns. However, so we look at people back in the day, and how did those people survive? Okay, so I want you to, at any time, you know, you're with a small child, anytime you're with a baby who's just started walking, you know, they're learning their environment, they're walking around, they're falling over, they're touching this, they're touching that, you know, they're putting their hand in the toilet, they're trying to eat grass, they're trying to, you know, grab bugs, they're trying to do this, they're trying to do that, they're trying to do everything, you know what I mean? They're just trying to interact with their environment as much as they possibly can. And most parents, you know what I mean, they grab their kid, they're like, no, don't touch that, don't do this, don't lick that, you know, don't lick that with your, you know, don't lick your finger and do that, whatever it is, okay? And the reason we do that, and this is not conclusive, you know, I've done some research, but this is mainly logic and just looking at inherent beliefs and primal beliefs and primordial beliefs and the pass down of wealth, and also the pass down of knowledge, subconscious knowledge through genetics, okay, through our ancestors, okay? And these little kids, you know, inherently, subconsciously, instinctively, right, almost primal, they interact with the environment, and then they want to touch as much things as they can, as I explained before. Why do they do this inherently? And it's for the simple fact that in the first few years of life, that is the time where the child should be exposed to the most amount of things in their environment, to the most amount of good bacteria and bacteria in the environment, the most amount of viruses in, this is a bit of a tongue twister, the most amount of viruses in their environment. So that is basically why we inherently do that, because if we know if we do it in the first stages of life, okay, we're going to be able to better deal with those viruses, bacteria later on in life, okay? It's called having an immune system, okay? And an immune system is basically just gone out of circulation, it's gone out of times. So that's why we have an immune system, to interact with all these things within our environment, okay? So it is extremely important for a child to expose themselves to all these new bacteria, all these new viruses earlier on in life. When you expose it later on in life, there's obviously a big potential to get sick. So this is the first thing I want to talk about. I've talked about the comorbidities, and I've talked about the immune system. Okay, we'll go back to the comorbidities. I'm going around in circles, I'm mixing it around a bit, but that's fine. Okay, as long as the knowledge gets out there. So, as I said, you know, heart disease, cancer, you know, heightened blood pressure, all these conditions are extremely common in our environment. Why are they common? Okay, that's a whole other video that I'll make down the line. But even though we live in a time of so much convenience and so much technology, as I said before, and we live in the age of information, you know, you don't have to go to university. You don't have to, obviously, if you want to, you can. You don't have to, you know, be studying for hours a day. You don't have to be, you know, you don't have to be racking your brain. You don't have to be a bookworm. it's good to be a bookworm, it's good to read a lot of books, but you know, back in the day, to acquire knowledge, you know, people would go to the library, they would spend hours in the library. Now it's as simple as going on your phone and bang, 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 such. So, as I said, I'll explain why we're in such a health crisis just in general, but most of the people dying from the coronavirus are dying because of these comorbidities, okay? When someone decent health is presented with the virus, okay, when they are infected, there is a 99.99997% survival rate, okay? And even people over a certain age, even people above, I believe, 65, even when they contract the virus, their survival rate is 98%, I believe. So some more stats have come out. Obviously, we've had a lot of time now to look at the research. I've had a lot of time to do a lot of different research, looking at the thing. I look at all different perspectives. I don't just look at one perspective. I do look at the mainstream narrative. I do look at the government political science, government political scientists. You know, you got to be wary of those guys. You definitely got to take what they say with a grain of salt. And I'll carry on explaining why after. But so some other research came out that not everyone, but the majority of people on the stats, you know, we saw the stats coming out, we saw the stats on the news, we saw the stats wherever, we saw the stats on the World Health Organization website, wherever you saw the death stats and the case stats, you know, and the numbers were getting high, they were tallying up, whatever, and the majority of those numbers, right, the CDC, the Centers of Disease Control in America, okay, this is it's about as mainstream legit as you can get, you know, the Centers of Disease Control stated that the majority, and this was obviously months after the initial lockdowns, the initial burst, you know, obviously they're not going to present you with this information when you're in lockdown and when you're tied down, but the majority of people who died of the virus didn't die of the virus, but they died with the virus. Now, you may have heard a few people say certain things, and if you haven't heard what I'm about to say, you'll be very surprised. You know, if you're one of these people who exclusively listen to the mainstream narrative, who exclusively listen to the political and the political scientists and the political doctors and the political health ministers, you'll be very surprised to hear that and this was when they first started testing it with the PCR test, which is very controversial, and the PCR test is finally being phased out, that's a whole another video as well. I don't want this video to be like 10 hours long. Anyway, so, get this. You could have died in a car crash, okay, had COVID at the time, and you would have been listed as a COVID death. Now, there is a lot of reasons for this, okay, and you're probably wondering, how does that happen? You know, surely doctors and people working in hospitals and the people who are reporting the numbers, you know, surely they have some more common sense, or they have more of a moral compass that, you know, will prevent them from potentially dangerous information from getting out there, right? And there's many reasons for this. As I said, I'll explain it in another video. One of them was they would basically be giving bonuses to hospitals if the patient was registered as a coronavirus patient. We also saw that there was no flu cases during the coronavirus pandemic. And the fact that there was literally zero cases of the flu. This could have been for the fact that people weren't getting tested for the flu, people were exclusively getting tested for coronavirus, which is quite bad. You know, the fact that people were exclusively getting tested for coronavirus. You know, they should have done multiple tests. They should have done an influenza test. Obviously, there's so many strains of this common flu. That's why you can't really make a vaccine for the common flu. But yeah, and you know, it goes even crazier. You know, if you're swimming in the ocean at some point, and you were killed by a shark, and you had COVID at the time, and because of the PCR test, right? I'll make a whole other video about the controversy around the PCR test and why it's being phased out. You know, there was a lot of false positives. You know what I mean? There's been a few public figures who have came out, notably Elon Musk, and he went to the clinic to get tested. He got tested 4 times in one day. 2 came back as positive, 2 came back as negative. So we're seeing, and this is conclusive, you know what I mean, you can't argue this. Even if you are one of these mainstream news people, you can't argue the fact that we're seeing a lot of false positives, you know, basically in every facet of society, okay? So the fact that most numbers were simply inflated, you know, I can conclusively say that the coronavirus numbers were inflated because of the comorbidities, the faulty PCR test, right, and also the fact that flu cases went to 0, okay, which is just a little bit suspect, just a little bit, okay. Anyway, comorbidities, alright. Doesn't matter what virus you have, okay. It doesn't matter if it's SARS-2. It doesn't matter if it's all these viruses that have quite, you know, mysteriously happened every 2 years. You know, Zika, Ebola. There was SARS-CoV-2 back in the day. Swine flu. You know, it happens like it's almost numerological. You know what I mean? It's almost chronological to some extent. Anyway, any of these viruses, if you have someone with comorbidities, they're going to die, guys, because they don't have a strong immune system. It's because their body is performing in such an inefficient way, they simply can't repel the virus. They simply can't. The immune system simply is not strong enough for this. So that's the first thing, okay? Looking at our society and actually analysing people's health. You know, George Orwell had a very beautiful quote that I will put on screen now, and I can't remember it, so I'll just read it. But you know, his quote was about medical science. You know, we're in the age of information, we're in the age of technology, but people are as unhealthy as they've ever been in society. You know, this is very bad. You know, we're supposed to have all this technological development, and people are dying at a crazy rate. You know, so comorbidities is the first thing we've got to look at. We've got to look at people's diets. That's obviously the main factor. We've got to look at the abundance of fast food. We've got to look at the convenience of fast food. What people have got to realize is that, like, these people, you know, I wouldn't even say it's their fault too much. You know, obviously, they can definitely hold blame for all these health conditions, but our modern society is set up in such a way that it's so common for people to be working 70 hours a week. You know, they've got multiple children they've got to support. They've got different people they've got to support. You know, they're doing crazy hours. They've got no time to prepare any food, and they just come home, they're going to get KFC. You know, they're going to get McDonald's. And that is looking at it at the very surface level. I'm going to make videos about how, in my personal life, I want to help the people in my local community and the people here in New Zealand. Because I see the comorbidities of people, I see the obesity, I see the heart disease, and it, you know, it really pains me. So in the next few weeks, I'll be launching a nutrition initiative to help people, and also I'll be trying to sell, you know, see how this goes. I'll be trying to sell meals online and potentially even sell meals on Facebook. And it's perfect time at the moment. It's the lockdown, so I'll be selling convenient, cheap meals. I'm not doing it for the money. I couldn't give a shit about the money. If I could do it for free, I would do it for free. I just want to help people. Obviously, I can't do it for free because you got to buy the food. You know, obviously, no one's going to invest in me for the simple fact that they're not going to get any return on investment. You know, the government has spent billions of dollars on vaccines, but I haven't seen one public health minister actually say, you know what, clean your diet up a bit, mate. expose yourself somewhat to new bacteria and viruses through your immune system. That is the only way you have to expose your immune system for it to actually learn and for it to actually be able to function in combat. And it's constantly got to be firing. You know, your immune system's got to be firing, just like all your other bodily systems, just like your endocrine system, your respiratory system, your cardiovascular system. If you don't go for a run, if you don't pump your heart, your cardiovascular system is not going to improve. So it's the same with the immune system. As I said before, it's the reason children expose themselves to new threats. And that's honestly why everyone should expose themselves to new threats. You know, obviously with these lockdowns, people have been cooped up at home. That's the reason we have spikes in cases. That's the reason we have spikes in sickness. Because people are cooped up at home, they're not being exposed to anything new. They're constantly rubbing down surfaces, they're wiping down surfaces, they're constantly applying toxic hand sanitizer to their hands. And it's just not good. You know what I mean? I'm not that much of a religious person, but we have everything available to us. You know, God has provided everything to us. You know what I mean? And that is a very not modernist, obviously, but that is a very traditional way of viewing things. You know what I mean? God provided us with everything we could possibly need, and it's simply the greed of man that has been restricting resources, and the illusion of restricting resources, and all these societal systems that keep us in a numb and lowered state. So we've talked about comorbidities, okay? We've talked about actually helping people, grassroots level, teaching people about nutrition, teaching people about very basic forms of exercise. You don't need to be flipping running marathons. You don't need to be swimming oceans. You don't need to be lifting hundreds of kilograms, okay? You don't. You need to just do something very little, very small. If it's going for a walk, if it's playing with your kids, if it's playing netball with a few of your mates down at the court, if it's dancing, whatever it is, just do it. You know what I mean? Like, it's always good for someone to find. I think everyone has a physical outlet they enjoy. I think everyone does actually have one. A lot of people, you know, find it earlier on in life and they thrive, and a lot of people never find that for the simple fact that they're not looking at the try. But comorbidities and the immune system, okay, that is literally the way to combat this virus. If everyone was healthy, if we go back to Paleolithic societies, if everyone lived like that, we wouldn't have a pandemic. Everyone will be healthy. Everyone's immune system will be firing. And obviously, there are people with autoimmune issues where they've got a compromised immune system. Okay, these people are special cases. You got to look at them in different ways. You know, there's obviously people who are going to be more susceptible to the virus genetically. Okay, as I said, an autoimmune disease, pulmonary disease. You know, prior respiratory conditions. Obviously, you've got to look at those people in more special cases. I do appreciate the wonders of modern medicine. However, I'm still against a big pharmaceutical cartel, is what I like to call them, because they're the biggest drug dealers in the world, let's be honest. They got nothing. El Chapo's got nothing on them. Pablo Escobar's got nothing on the big pharma cartel. So, the immune system and the comorbidities, okay, simply, and I know it's a big ask. I know you just want to sit back and drink your beers and eat your KFC and let your belly grow and whatever, but then don't fucking complain. You know what I mean? You shouldn't be allowed to complain if you're just going to carry on going down that wrong road. I truly want to help the people in my community. You know, I walk down the streets and I see what's happened to people. And the fact that, as I said before, the fact that the government's invested billions of dollars in vaccines, but your health minister hasn't told you, eat clean, exercise a little bit, stay away from fatty foods, stay away from fast food. You know what I mean? A day, you know, each, you know, whatever your day off is, allot that day to just prepare some food. You know what I mean? It's simply convenience. I'm going to make a whole other video on nutrition, okay? But I've basically covered all my bases. To combat this virus, we need to make sure our immune systems are constantly firing and are constantly improving, and they're simply not being able to do that in this current situation. And also, all these people with comorbidities, it's never too late. You know, a lot of these people have lost hope. It's never too late. You can teach an old dog new tricks. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago or today. Anyway, I really hope you guys enjoyed that video. Obviously the powers that be aren't gonna allow us to flourish, unfortunately. If everyone actually took this advice and there was no more obesity, no more heart disease, if everyone, I'm not saying you have to have massive arms and a ripped 8-pack. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying it's quite simple. It's honestly extremely simple when you look at it. Keep the immune system firing, and don't put yourself in a position where you're in such bad health that you could potentially die, and then a virus will come along and kill you for the simple fact that your immune system can't defend itself because of your ill health. So I hope you guys learned something from the video. If you're a mainstream narrative person or if you're an alternate narrative person. Personally, I do look at mainstream science and I do look at alternate science, and I look at every side, and I'm impartial, I'm unbiased. I'm impartial and I'm unbiased. Anyway, thank you for watching the video.